Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts, with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I am the American Haunt Historian, Alan Sircy. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found the show, and if you've been listening for a while, thank you for coming back. And before we get started, go ahead and hit subscribe or follow wherever you're listening. Leave a review if you can, and share the show with someone who enjoys true crime, folklore, or ghost stories. That's how we keep this thing going. And you can find me on Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook, Instagram, and if you got questions or stories you want me to cover, send them in, and I'll start answering some on the show in future episodes. I plan on doing a Q&A here in a few weeks. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, and if you've read some of my books, you know grave robbing's kind of my thing. It's just a weird, taboo thing that it was an industry in the shadows in the 1800s, and these medical colleges had to have a steady stream of cadavers they had to shut down. So today I kind of want to dive back into that, and there are some stories that are just so disturbing, so emotionally twisted, that they blur the line between grief and madness. Most grave robbers throughout history were motivated by greed. Some stole jewelry from corpses. Others sold bodies to medical schools for profit. But every now and then, a different kind of grave robber emerged. Someone driven not by money, but by heartbreak. Someone who became so consumed by death that they could no longer accept the finality of the grave. Today's episode is about grieving grave robbers. Men and women whose obsession pushed them beyond morality, beyond sanity, and deep into the darkness of cemeteries after midnight. It's a theme that appears again and again throughout history. People unable to let go of the dead. And a few stories embody that horror more than the infamous case of Carl Tanzler, the man who stole the body of the woman he believed destiny had promised to him. Carl Tanzler was born in Dresden, Germany in 1877. From childhood, he claimed he was haunted by visions. According to Tanzler, a spirit named Countess Anna von Kassel appeared to him repeatedly and revealed the face of a beautiful dark-haired woman he was supposedly destined to love forever. Whether these visions were genuine delusions, fantasies, or stories Carl invented later in life is impossible really to know, but they became the foundation for his obsession. Even after immigrating to America, marrying, and starting a family, Carl remained disconnected from reality. Those around him described him as eccentric and increasingly detached from ordinary life. By the late 1920s, Tanzler was living in Key West, Florida, where he worked as a radiological technologist at the Marine Hospital. That's where he met Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, a 21-year-old Cuban-American woman dying from tuberculosis. The moment Carl saw her, he became convinced she was the woman from his childhood visions. To him, it wasn't a coincidence. It was fate finally revealing itself. Now, Elena was beautiful, soft-spoken, and tragically ill. Carl devoted himself entirely to her care. He showered her with jewelry, clothing, perfume, and gifts. He promised her family he could cure her through homemade treatments and strange experimental devices he made himself. As her illness worsened, Carl's obsession deepened. He proposed marriage. He swore he would save her life. But tuberculosis in 1930, it was often a death sentence. On October 25th, 1931, Elena died at just 22 years old. For most people, grief eventually gives way to acceptance. For Carl Tanzler, grief transformed into something horrifying. With the blessing of Elena's family, Carl helped construct an elaborate above-ground mausoleum at Key West Cemetery. Every single night after her burial, he visited the crypt alone. He sat beside her remains for hours in the darkness. According to Carl, Elena's spirit began appearing to him inside the mausoleum. He later claimed she spoke to him, sang to him, and begged him to bring her home. And in April of 1933, that's what he did. Under cover of darkness, Carl broke into the mausoleum and removed Elena's decomposing corpse. He loaded her body into a toy wagon and pulled her through the streets of Key West in the middle of the night back to his home. There, he began one of the most grotesque acts of devotion in American history. Using piano wire, plaster, wax, silk, rags, and homemade preservatives, Carl painstakingly reconstructed Elena's corpse. He replaced deteriorating flesh with wax. He wired her bones together. He fashioned wigs from her actual hair and dressed her in expensive gowns. He filled the room with perfume to mask the smell of decay, and he placed her body in his bed. For 7 years, Carl Tanzler lived with Elena's corpse. He danced with her in his arms. He sang love songs to her. He spoke to her as though she was alive. Some investigators later believed he engaged in intimate acts with the body, though the full extent of what happened inside that house may never truly be known. Neighbors occasionally spotted strange silhouettes in the windows late at night, but few suspected the horrifying truth. Eventually, rumors spread throughout Key West that Carl was dancing with a corpse inside his home. Elena's sister heard the stories, and she went to the authorities. When police entered Carl's house in 1940, they encountered a scene that haunted many of them for the rest of their lives. The overpowering smell of perfume and rot filled the air. Lying in Carl's bed was the grotesquely preserved remains of Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, reconstructed into a horrifying imitation of life. The story exploded across America. Newspapers called it the Corpse Bride case and dubbed Tanzler Count Carl von Kassel. Shockingly, many people sympathized with him. They portrayed him as a tragic romantic rather than a deeply disturbed man. At trial, Carl insisted spirits had guided his actions and that Elena wanted to remain with him, though he was found guilty of removing her body from the mausoleum. Legal technicalities spared him from serious punishment. After the trial, Elena's body was secretly reburied in an unknown grave somewhere in Key West Cemetery to prevent further disturbance. You know Carl would go back. But Carl Tanzler, he faded into obscurity and died in 1952. But even in his death, his obsession remained. When his body was discovered, investigators reportedly found a life-size wax figure resembling Elena nearby. It's easy to dismiss Carl Tanzler as simply insane, but his story reveals something deeply unsettling about grief itself. There are people throughout history who become so consumed by loss that they can no longer accept death as permanent. The grave becomes not an ending, but an obstacle. Come on, ladies. I know you want a man that will love you like that. I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's just truly bananas. But wait, there's more. It brings me to another strange and tragic case from the South. In 1910, the quiet town of Stanford, Kentucky became the center of one of the strangest grave-robbing incidents in American history. George Barnes Softly was a brilliant young attorney from a respected Kentucky family. At only 28 years old, he contracted typhoid fever. For weeks, his family watched anxiously as he battled the illness. At first, it appeared he might survive. He was getting better. But on March 7, 1910, George suddenly took a turn for the worse, and he died. The tragedy devastated his father, Judge Micah Softly, who died only 4 months later from grief and his poor health. Father and son were buried side by side at Buffalo Springs Cemetery, there in Stanford, Kentucky. But then something strange it happened at the judge's funeral. A mysterious woman approached the cemetery gravedigger, Hugh Young, and began asking unusual questions. She wanted to know exactly where George Softly was buried. Even more disturbingly, she asked how much it would cost to dig up his remains and transport them long distances. The gravedigger found her behavior unsettling, as one would, but he pointed her toward George's grave. Later that day, Young spotted the woman lying across George's graveside, just sobbing uncontrollably. She rolled in the grass, wailed hysterically, and behaved so radically that Young contacted George's brother, Rowan. Alarmed by the woman's actions, Rowan hired guards to watch over the family graves. Weeks passed, and eventually the guards that were hired were dismissed. And that proved to be a terrible, terrible mistake. On January 31st, 1911, cemetery sexton John Kirby arrived at Buffalo Springs Cemetery and discovered George Softly's grave had been dug up during the night. The coffin had been dragged partially to the surface. Astonishingly, George's body was still inside. Whoever had dug him up had apparently been interrupted or frightened away before they could complete their work. Authorities followed wagon tracks leading away from the cemetery while bloodhounds searched the area. Suspicion quickly turned toward a woman named Amanda Harrison. Investigators learned Amanda had purchased a spade from a local hardware store the day before the attempted grave robbery. When police went looking for her, she had vanished. Amanda was gone. But eventually, officers found her hiding at a relative's home and arrested her for desecrating a grave. But what Amanda confessed stunned the community. She admitted she had fallen deeply in love with George Softly years earlier while he represented her husband during divorce proceedings. Though their relationship had never been romantic, Amanda became emotionally obsessed with him, and George's death had shattered her. Then, she claimed God began speaking to her. Amanda insisted the Lord instructed her to dig up George's body so he could be resurrected. Alone in the darkness, she worked from dusk until dawn trying to pry that coffin open. She later admitted she became frustrated when she couldn't break into it and realized she needed some more tools. By the time she returned with a screwdriver, sunrise was approaching, and she quickly fled the cemetery. At trial, Amanda wept openly while insisting she had committed no wrongdoing because she was acting under divine instruction. God told her to do it. Rowan Softly believed she was mentally unstable and pursued a lunacy hearing. Amanda was eventually committed briefly to an insane asylum before doctors later declared she was sane enough for release. Like Carl Tanzler, Amanda Harrison's story forces us to confront a terrifying question. What happens when grief mutates into obsession? What happens when love becomes so consuming that a person convinces themselves death is just temporary? It's reversible. Death is negotiable. And these stories endure because they touch on something ancient, deeply human. The refusal to let go. Across the country, cemeteries are filled with legends about mourners who never truly left the graveside. Stories of widows sleeping beside tombstones, parents speaking to dead children, lovers who wander graveyards long after midnight. Most grief remains private, but sometimes grief can make you do some pretty crazy things. So if you enjoyed today's episode of Southern Ghost Stories, be sure to follow the podcast and leave a review. You can also find my books and more Southern folklore at AlanSircy.com. Now, if you enjoy the grave robbing and just the wild, weird silliness that it entails, I do have a book called Fear and Folklore Grave Robbers. Lots of wild, creepy tales like the one you just heard. Stories of guys like Old Man Dead, William Cunningham, the famous grave robber in Cincinnati, or should I say, infamous grave robber. Yeah, it's crazy the stuff these guys would do. You can make a killing raiding these graveyards, and those guys made a fortune. So also, my next big show is Spawn a Scarefest coming up in Lexington. I'll be there. It's June 5th, 6th, and 7th in Lexington, Kentucky. Lots of celebrities: Skeet Ulrich, Kane Hodder, David Howard Thornton, the guy that does Art the Clown. Make plans to come see me. It's going to be a really fun show. I enjoy going to Kentucky. I enjoy meeting you guys. It's always a lot of fun. And also, one more thing. Have you been to Monster City Madhouse yet? MonsterCityMadhouse.com. They got a brand new shirt, and it's a whole lot of fun. According to them, the Bride of Frankenstein has spoken. And honestly, she may have a point. The new mini Monster Tee throws together a chaotic crew of pint-sized creatures, creepy cuteness, and vintage Halloween cartoon vibes into one gloriously weird design, featuring tiny vampires, little mummies, swampy troublemakers, and one very unimpressed bride rocking the legendary line, "Boys are gross." I kind of disagree with that one, but still, go to MonsterCityMadhouse.com, check out all their new apparel. They got the Lagoon Live from the Creature of the Black Lagoon. My buddy Ben, he runs the t-shirt company, do a great job. Old retro Halloween, spooky horror shirts. Lots of really cool stuff at MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Use promo code SAVE10 to get 10% off your order. So make sure you go to MonsterCityMadhouse.com. So, yeah, this has been Southern Ghost Stories. I'm Alan Sircy, and I guess I'll see you guys in a few more days. And I hope you're digging the new Tennessee Tales Tuesday. I'm going to be dropping those every Tuesday, and it's going to be some shorter episodes. So keep checking back, and make sure you stop in Tuesday for more weird Tennessee folklore and ghost stories. I'll see you guys on Friday. Check out the exclusive shirts from Monster City Madhouse, Gravestone, Rocktober, and Val Halloween. All that and much more at MonsterCityMadhouse.com.